Jackie Jackson.
I'm the oldest Jackson.
And Tito Jackson.
The swingin'est Jackson.
And Marlon Jackson.
The dancingest Jackson.
And Michael Jackson.
The skinniest Jackson.
And Randy Jackson.
The cutest Jackson.
Let on me, mama.
Jackson's here. Jackson's there. Jackson's everywhere.
Well, I'm glad I was tough because look what I came out with. I came out with some kids that everybody loved all over the world.
What is the real story behind the Jacksons? How did this famous family deal with fame, money, and personal struggles? Were their lives as perfect as they seemed on stage? What secrets have been kept hidden for years? How did fame change their relationships and future? Now the truth is finally coming out. Let's delve in.
Imagine 11 kids living in a 2-bedroom house in Gary, Indiana. And Gary, Indiana is no Beverly Hills.
According to biography, Katherine Scrouse met Joseph Jackson when she was only 17 years old. Joseph was 2 years older than her. They dated for 2 years and got married in 1949. Together, they built a life in Gary, Indiana, and raised 9 children. Sadly, their 10th child, Brandon, passed away shortly after birth. Before marriage, Joseph had big dreams of becoming a professional boxer. He was already successful in the Golden Gloves boxing competition. But when Katherine gave birth to their first child, Maureen Rebby Jackson, in 1950, Joseph decided to give up boxing. Instead, he took a steady job as a crane operator at U.S. Steel to support his growing family.
Well, I'm glad I was tough because look what I came out with. I came out with some kids that everybody loved all over the world.
In the mid-1950s, Joseph still hoped for success in another way: music. He and his brother Luther started a band called the Falcons. Unfortunately, the band didn't last long and broke up after a few years. When Katherine and Joseph got married, they moved into a small 2-bedroom house. Gary, Indiana, was a tough place to live. It had gangs and wasn't very safe. Joseph worried about his 6 sons growing up in such an environment. Jackie Jackson, one of their sons, once said in an interview that their dad wanted to keep them away from bad influences like drugs. To do that, Joseph made sure his children were always busy, especially with music.
Had done a remarkable job creating the group.
Joseph Jackson was known to be very strict with his kids. Jermaine Jackson, another of Joseph's sons, once said their father was cold and distant. He never hugged them or said, "I love you." Instead, Joseph focused on turning his children into a strong musical group. The kids practiced music every day for 5 hours after school. They weren't allowed to go outside and play with other kids. Joseph wanted them to focus only on becoming the best.
It was hard when you have all those kids like I had.
But Joseph's discipline went beyond strict rules. If the children made mistakes during practice, he would punish them harshly. According to reports, he used belts, cords, or even tree branches to hit them. Michael Jackson, the youngest of the boys and the star of the family, suffered both physical and emotional abuse. Joseph would call Michael Big Nose to make fun of him, knowing it hurt his feelings. Michael was so scared of his father that he sometimes threw up just from seeing him. Janet Jackson, the youngest of all the children, said their father didn't even let them call him Dad. Instead, they had to call him Joseph.
It was really an atmosphere of competition. Competition breeds champions, but you can't let the competition overcome the love. And so it was all built on love, and Michael was full of it.
It all began in 1964 when Joe caught Tito playing his guitar after a string broke. Instead of getting mad, Joe was impressed and bought Tito his very own guitar. This small moment changed everything for the Jackson family. Soon, Tito, Jermaine, and Jackie started a group, and young Michael, who was only 5 years old, joined in to play the congas.
And I was learning songs by the Isley Brothers, Temptations, Fort, whatever. And then Jackie and Jermaine and there, we were harmonizing, and Michael and Marlon were...
Their childhood friends, Renaud Jones and Milford Height, also played keyboards and drums. Later in 1965, Marlon joined as the tambourine player. It was around this time that a family friend, Evelyn LaHaye, suggested they call themselves the Jackson 5. In 1966, the Jackson 5 won their first big talent show at Theodore Roosevelt High School in Gary, Indiana. Jermaine sang My Girl, and Michael performed barefootin'. The group kept growing, with Johnny Jackson and Ronnie Rancifer replacing their friends on drums and keyboards. The boys became popular in Gary and Chicago, performing in schools, theaters, and even at famous places like the Regal Theater in Chicago and the Apollo Theater in Harlem. In 1967, they won big talent competitions at both theaters. Gladys Knight, a famous singer, believed in the group and sent their music to Motown Records, but Motown turned them down at first. The Jackson 5 didn't give up. They recorded their first song, Big Boy, but it didn't lead to a deal yet.
I'm a big boy now. That's looking.
Being famous sounds like a dream, but for the Jackson 5, it came with a lot of challenges. Their rise to fame brought a busy schedule filled with constant touring and recording. This left little time for a normal childhood. They missed out on going to school like regular kids, playing with friends, and just being children. Life as a child star is hard. Many struggle to handle the pressure of fame or deal with losing it when they grow up. Sadly, some turn to unhealthy habits to cope. For the Jackson brothers, their fame brought them money and success, but it also left lasting scars, especially for the youngest member, Michael Jackson. In 1995, Michael released a song called Childhood, where he sang about wishing he could have had a normal childhood. He built a home called Neverland, inspired by Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. Michael once said he felt like Peter Pan, a boy who was lost and wanted to stay young forever. Jermaine Jackson, Michael's brother, wrote about their early years in a book. He shared how, between 1966 and 1968, they spent weekends performing and would often get home late, even on school nights. One time, their father, Joseph, was attacked by men before a show. Despite being hurt, Joseph told his sons to perform, even though they were scared and upset.
The same nerve the Beatles touched low these many years ago. Only this time it's a group of black teenagers fronted by an 11-year-old soul brother.
In November 1967, Joe Jackson signed his sons to Steeltown Records. This record label was owned by producer Gordon Keith. That same month, the boys recorded a song called Big Boy. By January 1968, the song was released as their first single. By March, it had sold 10,000 copies. Gordon Keith also helped the group land a deal with Atlantic Records to distribute Big Boy and another song, We Don't Have to Be Over 21, to fall in love. That same March, the Jackson 5 performed their first big gig at the Apollo Theater in New York City. They opened for famous singer Etta James. This was their first paying performance. Gordon Keith was working hard to make them a success, but Joe Jackson had other plans. Joe started looking for bigger opportunities and reached out to Motown Records. In July 1968, the boys opened for Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers at the Regal Theater. Bobby Taylor was amazed by young Michael Jackson's singing. He believed the group had something special, so he sent them to Detroit for an audition with Motown. At first, Motown's boss, Berry Gordy, wasn't interested in signing any more kid singers. But when he saw a recording of the Jackson 5's performance, he changed his mind. On July 26, 1968, Berry Gordy signed the Jackson 5 to a Motown contract.
Well, who else do you think makes the stage come to real life besides me and Ed Sullivan?
However, there was a problem. The Jackson 5 were still under contract with Steeltown Records. While their father, Joe, worked to settle the issue, the boys performed in strip clubs to earn money. In August, Motown's team, led by Suzanne DePass, began promoting the Jackson 5. They even told people that Diana Ross, the lead singer of the Supremes, had discovered the group. When the Jackson 5 performed for industry insiders at a club called The Daisy in Los Angeles, Michael Jackson was introduced as an 8-year-old sensation, even though he was almost 11 years old.
The boys came to Detroit for a showcase for Berry Gordy. And I remember them wearing these little green outfits and these hats, and they did a show in Berry's house in Detroit called The Pool.
Their father, Joe Jackson, became frustrated. Motown, their record company, didn't seem to want to help them make more big hits. So Joe started a nightclub show with his children, starting in Las Vegas and expanding to other places. By 1975, the Jackson 5 had sold over 60 million records, but they weren't happy with how little money they made from royalties, only 2.8%. They wanted more control over their music. At a press conference, they announced they were leaving Motown. Joe Jackson negotiated a new deal with Epic Records, offering the group 20% royalties. Jermaine Jackson didn't join the new deal. He stayed with Motown because he had married Hazel Gordy, the daughter of Motown's boss. Jermaine was replaced by Randy Jackson. Motown didn't let them keep the name The Jackson 5 because they owned it. So the brothers renamed themselves The Jacksons. Jermaine, however, had no regrets. In an interview, he said, "Motown did everything for us and our family. Even though his choice strained his relationship with his father and brothers, he stood by it."
But most of those kids that was Michael age during that time, they're not living now.
Now, with the members of the Jackson 5 all being preteens or teenagers when they broke big, the only Jackson who was in a serious relationship while traveling was Joseph. Outside of his troubling record as a parent, Joseph's record as a husband was also far from golden. According to CBS News, on 2 separate occasions, Katherine filed for divorce, though she never went through with the proceedings. Joseph said after they reconciled in 1988, "We just let our troubles die out. We survived. We love each other and we have children. That's why we're together." They remained married until his death, but they did not share a home together, as Joseph lived in Las Vegas and Katherine lived in California. The main reason for the divorce threats was infidelity on Joseph's part. In 1974, he fathered a child with his mistress of 25 years, Cheryl Terrell. Giovanni Jackson, the daughter of Joseph and Cheryl, according to Nikki Swift, had a great relationship with her father, though not much of a relationship with her half-siblings. In 2018, she wrote the book Bastard Child, discussing her relationship with her famous father and the rest of the Jackson family. In the book, she reveals that, unlike the rest of Joseph's children, he allowed her to refer to him as Dad instead of by his first name. Their next album, Triumph, came out in 1980 and was another success, selling over 1 million copies. It had hits like Lovely One, This Place Hotel, and Can You Feel It? In 1981, the Jacksons released a live album featuring songs from their Triumph tour. This album also sold well, reaching 500,000 copies. After a successful reunion, all 6 Jackson brothers decided to make a 6th album, which they called Victory. This album became their biggest hit, with songs like State of Shock, which featured Michael Jackson and Mick Jagger singing together. Only 2 of the Jackson brothers, Marlon and Jackie, provided background vocals for the song. Most of the songs on the album were recorded in this way, with each brother doing their own solo tracks. In September 2001, almost 17 years after they last performed together, all 6 Jackson brothers came together for a special show at Madison Square Garden. This event was to celebrate Michael Jackson's solo career, marking its 30th anniversary. The performance was a big moment for the family, and it aired in November of the same year. Fans were excited to see the brothers on stage again.
We came all the way from Hollywood to buy our cars from the #1 dealer.
And I'm one of your #1 fans, but where's Michael?
What are you doing on Michael? I'm looking for him.
So, Michael and Jermaine Jackson had their own share of drama, but for the Jackson brothers, things were a bit different. Michael's success as a solo artist made him a superstar, leaving his brothers, including Jermaine, feeling left behind. In 1991, Jermaine released a song called Word to the Bad. Many people saw it as an attack on Michael. The lyrics criticized Michael's plastic surgeries and his focus on fame. Jermaine, however, denied that the song was meant to insult Michael. He said he wrote it to help his little brother see reality. The song came after Michael worked with producers L.A. Reid and Babyface, whom Jermaine had planned to collaborate with first. Jermaine felt hurt and left out, but Michael didn't seem to care much about his brother's feelings. Years later, L.A. Reid wrote in his book, Sing to Me, that Michael ignored Jermaine's anger. Reid also shared that Michael loved watching videos of Prince, another famous musician, when he messed up during performances or in his movie Under the Cherry Moon. Michael found it funny showing his competitive side, even with other stars. In March 2009, Michael Jackson told the world he was planning a big comeback. He called the tour "This Is It." At first, it was supposed to be just 10 concerts in London, but by mid-March, it grew to 50 shows. Fans were excited, but Michael never got to perform. On June 25th, 2009, just 3 weeks before the tour was set to start, Michael was found unconscious in his Los Angeles home. His personal doctor, Conrad Murray, and paramedics tried to save him, but Michael was pronounced dead at the hospital. He was only 50 years old. An investigation revealed that Michael had been given a powerful drug called propofol to help him sleep. Dr. Murray gave it to him along with 2 other medicines. But this mix was dangerous. When the doctor checked on Michael later, he found him not breathing. Instead of calling for help immediately, Murray tried to fix things himself. Paramedics were called after more than an hour, but it was too late. The autopsy showed Michael died from too much propofol. In 2011, Dr. Murray was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to 4 years in jail, but only served 2.
The singer Michael Jackson is reported to have died from a heart attack.
After the death of Michael Jackson in 2009, his mother, Katherine Jackson, was appointed the guardian of his 3 children, according to CNN. Then in 2012, that guardianship was suspended after Jackson seemingly disappeared for 10 days, falling out of touch with her grandchildren and prompting her nephew to file a missing person report. According to a sworn legal statement, Jackson said that on July 14, 2012, just before a planned RV trip to see some of her sons perform a concert in New Mexico, a doctor came to her home, claiming to be sent by Jackson's regular physician, and advised her not to drive to New Mexico. Following doctor's orders, Jackson took a flight instead. As it turns out, that doctor, Alan Metzger, had no affiliation with Jackson's physician, but had once treated Michael Jackson for insomnia. The flight Jackson believed would take her to New Mexico instead landed in Arizona, whereupon the 82-year-old was driven to a spa and placed in a room with a non-functioning telephone and broken TV, and her cell phone and iPad were taken away from her. She thus had no idea that her 14-year-old granddaughter, Paris Jackson, was tweeting frequently about her missing grandmother. Jackson's guardianship was later restored after she returned home on July 26th. Now let's talk about Janet Jackson. At the 2004 Super Bowl halftime show, Janet Jackson performed with Justin Timberlake. During the show, Justin tried to remove part of Janet's costume as part of the performance, but something went wrong, and he pulled off more than planned. This caused a small part of Janet's breast to be shown on live TV. People were shocked because millions were watching. At the time, Les Moonves was the boss of CBS, the channel that aired the Super Bowl. Many years later, in 2018, Moonves lost his job after many women accused him of bad behavior. But back in 2004, he was very upset about what happened with Janet. Even though Janet apologized, Moonves wanted to punish her. He made sure she couldn't perform at the 2004 Grammy Awards. He also told companies connected to CBS like MTV, VH1, and radio stations to stop playing Janet's music. This hurt her album, Demita Joe, which came out that same year. Many believe Janet faced unfair treatment, especially since Justin Timberlake didn't face the same level of backlash. This incident remains a big part of Janet's career story. Also, when Janet was 18-year-old, she eloped in 1984 with James DeBarge, a member of the R&B group DeBarge. The wedding reportedly took place without Jackson's parents, brothers, or record label having much, if any, prior knowledge. I tried to convince her that she's a teen idol and people just wouldn't accept it, A&M Records executive John McClain said. It took him 8 months to convince Jackson to annul the marriage. 2 decades later, DeBarge claimed on WETV's Growing Up Hip Hop that the relationship resulted in a secret daughter, which Jackson denied to Vibe. In 2000, Jackson's second husband, Renee Elizondo, filed for divorce, according to Rolling Stone, revealing to the public that they'd been hitched for 9 years. After the split, per MTV News, Elizondo sued his ex-wife, alleging that Jackson didn't adhere to an agreement to split property acquired before their marriage. 2 years later, according to a source, Jackson agreed to pay Elizondo $15 million and hand over a Mercedes and a Malibu beach house. She was married to her third husband, billionaire businessman Wissam Al-Mana, from 2012 until their separation in 2017, just after the birth of their son, Isa. Jackson found Almana to be controlling, and he reportedly banned his wife from wearing clothing he found too revealing or dancing too provocatively in her music videos. And then Toya Jackson was in an abusive marriage. From 1989 to 1997, according to People, Toya Jackson was married to Jack Gordon, a casino businessman who also served as his wife's manager and who once spent half a year in prison for bribing a gaming official. On a 2013 episode of her reality show, Life with Toya, Jackson explained that she didn't want to marry Gordon, but had been coerced and forced to do so, ultimately kept in a chapel against her will by a bodyguard hired by Gordon. I was brainwashed by him. I really felt like a robot. I was being beaten, Jackson said. He dictated my career choices. He made me say the things that he wanted me to say in my interviews. According to the Chicago Tribune, it was Gordon's idea to have Jackson pose for Playboy in 1989, which became one of the magazine's best-selling issues ever, according to Michael Jackson Rocked the World and Lives Forever. After Gordon tried to make Jackson perform in more and more explicit productions, she filed for divorce.
The Jackson dynasty mourning the death of
Tito's former wife, Dolores Dee Dee Jackson, whom he married in 1972. The couple divorced in 1993, according to ABC News, and scarcely a year later, in 1994, Dee Dee Jackson died at the age of 39. Her death was ruled accidental following a drowning in the pool on the grounds of the Ladera Heights, California, home of Don Bahana, her boyfriend. Tito Jackson immediately had some suspicions. My first question was, drown? What was she doing in the water, he said. You know, 'cause Dee Dee and I, neither of us swam. Bahana told reporters that Dee Dee actually liked to swim, and that the many bruises found on her body were the result of him struggling to rescue her when she was drowning. An investigation ensued, and in 1998, Bahana was convicted of second-degree and sentenced to a 15 years to life prison term, according to the Los Angeles Times. The Jackson Five gave hope to America. At a time when people thought black families were struggling, the Jacksons showed the world a different picture. They were a close, loving family, and they became symbols of success and happiness. They reminded people of the American dream and showed that black families could achieve great things. The Jackson Five did more than just make music. They broke racial barriers. They were one of the first African-American groups to appeal equally to both black and white audiences. Their music reached everyone, and they helped change how people saw black people, especially black men. The Jackson Five showed the world that African Americans could be role models for all families, no matter their race.